Obviously, this workshop is the second in our series of workshops around the Three Waters reform and asking that question, what's best for our community? The major topic or item of this presentation will be the survey results from last week's survey. So without further ado, the survey results themselves, there was a high level of agreement amongst councillors across some broad statements there. First being status quo is no longer an option, that delivering the Three Water service will be more expensive and challenging in the future. Aggregation is an approach to delivering benefits in the Three Waters space, and that the scale of aggregation was a key issue for us. There are also some other specific concerns raised primarily through the comments. So let's just have a look at those statements and how I've sort of come to those statements in this slide from the survey results. So this here, that is obviously question 2, the status quo is no longer an option. 90% of councillors agreeing with that statement. The second one here is, do you believe the provision of wastewater service and water services can become more expensive in the future? 100% response there, which I think, just really speaks to the fact that we've got a really good handle on the fact that there are level of service drivers through places like Matamata-Piako and regulation increases through economic regulation, and again, Matamata-Piako really pushing the cost of the service up, or will be pushing the cost of service up as we go. Other vehicles or other mechanisms like the national policy statement are also having an impact, or will have an impact in this space. So I think we all understand that well. There you go. So this one here is question 4. I'm concerned about meeting the challenges in the future. So 2/3 of councillors agreed with that statement, which I guess again is fair enough. There are a lot of drivers in there, like we just talked about, but also a lot of unknowns, particularly around things like the liability for private suppliers in that drinking water space. So this one here, the final slide in the status quo sort of picture was question 3. If we maintain the management of Three Waters, how would that impact our ability to deliver non-Three Waters opportunities in the future? Now, I think the question, this is my fault, guys, I think the question wasn't worded particularly well, and I gather that from the comments made. The comments sort of focused primarily on Three Waters delivery, and that's why it's got a little asterisk here. But even then, there's sort of a 50-50 split there about will MPDC struggle to deliver non-water related things in the future? So just to talk about that a little bit, if you could think, and that's where the next slide will come in. So Manai's going to speak to the next slide, but in terms of a lead into that, things that might impact our ability to deliver non-water things in the future if we retain water. Well, obviously we've got these regulatory conditions are driving our water spend up. So that could impact our capital profile. We could end up spending money on water meters that we didn't intend on spending, for example, management of private supplies, all things that aren't in our long-term plan. And in addition to that, there's maybe some confidence or sensitivity issues around our LTP when you sort of think of it as a whole. We had that example last week of the Matamata wastewater plant planned for 11 million, but it is still within the realms of possibility that one of the only viable solutions for us is a $30 million upgrade. So all those sorts of things, all those little risks, all those little unknowns, all those things that may come in through regulatory change will all impact and eat up into our existing debt cap. So I guess that sort of leaves us with the question or questions around, well, if you're eating into that debt cap, eventually council may come to a point where you need to make some trade-offs. You need to consider, and this is what the question was meant to drive at, is, how, in terms of your collective mind space, are you thinking about that, about what the impact of retaining water would mean in terms of trade-offs into the future? I'm thinking a water upgrade versus something to do with pools or spas, a wastewater treatment plant upgrade versus an upgrade of a stadium, some reticulation upgrades versus parks and reserves. You may find yourself in a space where you're delaying a lot of those more community-facing works in order to deliver these infrastructure works. as a question. In addition to that, so beyond just the money, this question was meant to be focused in on some of those other aspects, like how much governance time will you be spending on Three Waters? So at the moment, other than this little period now, considering the reform, I sort of pop in maybe once every quarter, maybe once every 6 months. You guys hear from me. I'm sure you hear from Susan about much more regularly about the growth aspect of things, but potentially the amount of time you're going to spend discussing Three Waters will have to increase over time. And you're going to think about what will that impact. If you're spending more time talking about Three Waters, you're spending less time thinking about the other things and talking about the other things you already are talking about. So that's an impact on your governance bandwidth in effect. Beyond that, if the water space, as the government signalling and our regulators signalling, is going to become a much more technical heavy space, you may need to also think about what sort of additional supports you need as a council to fulfill those future governance expectations in this space. Is it special technical committees or anything like that? Is it additional training for council to be more plugged in than we are today into the nuances of infrastructure management? And then finally, this question was also meant to hone in on the staffing impacts as well. If you sort of think about our staff at the moment, we've got about 40-ish across the council. I'm counting those little half people as well. 40 people dedicated to delivering in the Three Waters space. If you're to double our capital work, well, you're probably going to have to close to double the amount of people there. And council's got a finite number of people and resources, so you're eventually going to have to take more time away from them. A good example of that would be someone like Fiona, who obviously has other responsibilities as a general manager, not just water, but you could easily foresee her time being spent more and more on water, which means she's spending less and less time on roading, refuse and recycling, customer service and things like that. You need to have another Fiona, and you could probably duplicate that sort of line of thinking across multiple parts of the organisation. Susan will be another really good example of that, having to spend more time thinking about water. So that's what the question was meant to focus in on. But in general, I think that sort of supports the status quo is no longer an option type philosophy. So with that said, I'll just hand over to Manai, and he's going to talk a bit more about the debt impacts and sort of fleshing that area out a bit more.
Thanks, Karl. Good morning, everybody. I did see you all last week, but you didn't see me. That was my goal. So, look, Lania has done some work for us again. She's done some fantastic work for us again. Just want to make a couple of comments about this slide. So, this slide, which talks about doubling our capital over the next 10 years, we would 100% agree with the comment made by, I think, by Councillor Goodger last week, that there's no way that NZ Inc. is going to be able to gear up to double the capital program for all the waters over the next 10 years. We would 100% agree with that. And even looking at MPDC trying to double its program over the next 10 years, there's just not the capacity to do that. So we're not suggesting that this scenario is going to play out. What we wanted to just illustrate to council is what effect a doubling might have. So in the Wix modelling that they've done for the first 10 years, they actually have got a capital program which is double what ours is for the first 10 years. They've actually averaged it over 30 years, but it works out about double what we've got in the LTP. You will recall that Lania spoke to you last week about the headroom, what would happen in terms of our headroom for debt with the LTP and without Three Waters. That orangey line was without the Three Waters, and as you can see, as you saw last week, our headroom actually increases, so we have capacity to borrow more for non-waters activities. If we were to go ahead and double the capital program for Three Waters, that yellow line indicates there that we would exceed our 150% target that we set ourselves, remembering that the LGFA would actually probably let us go up to 175%. It's still being prudent. But that just shows you what impact would happen there, that we would go right over the current 150% target. The way that we would respond, now putting aside reform, if we put aside reform and said MPDC was to stick to its, as it exists now, and we were to manage water, I think we certainly have accepted that there are that the capital program we have in our LTP is probably going to have to change. That if the government doesn't amalgamate or doesn't aggregate and just brings in the regulatory reforms, we're looking at a capital works program that is greater than what we've got in our LTP. So whether it's double or whether it's 50% more, there would be some change. So Lania mentioned the way we would respond to this kind of change, the way we would have to respond to ensure that we could borrow enough to complete a capital works program, increased program, is we would have to increase our revenue. And just to give you some indication, at the moment in our LTP, we've got roughly Three Waters income of about 14 million, and we increased by just over 80% at the end of the 10 years to about 24 million. To enable us to fund or to borrow enough capital to enable us to meet our 150% threshold, we would have to increase our revenue by about 56 million by 2031. And that 56 million, it would fall primarily, we've assumed it would fall on the Three Waters. So again, giving you some indication. So from about 14 million in 2021, we would be going up to just over 80 million in 2031. So a fairly massive increase. But, I mean, these figures are all very theoretical. I guess the point that we wanted to make is how much the quantum or the potential that figure, that additional capital, at additional rates would kind of overwhelm or sit over the top of all our other activities. So it is kind of daunting, but I just want to reinforce that it's a theoretical scenario. We wouldn't suggest this would play out in this way, but as I mentioned before, our LTP capital program as it is, with all the new regulation, let alone the aggregation, it would be up for some form of review, and there's no doubt in our minds that over the next 10 to 20 years, we'd be looking at a dramatically different capital program. I'd be happy to take any questions. In fact, I'd be happy for those of you who want it. I went through Lania's figures last night and just did some calcs myself. But I know some of you love that detail, and I'd be happy to share that information with you. I would just again caveat that when you do this kind of modelling at a high level, there's always something that pops out. And, we just wanted to give you a high level sense of what that impact might be.
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit disappointed. I'm disappointed in hearing this. I'm getting the feeling that we're getting steered in a certain direction. None of these things has come up in conversations from 2 years ago or 3 years ago or anything like this until this Three Waters debacle has come apart from last year. And last week in the workshop, we were listening to the people are telling us their water and wastewater plants and that they're actually in really good condition. And we're improving all the time, making improvements all the time. So it's a little bit disappointing to start to get the vibe or the feeling that we really should be jumping into this, and the cost could potentially be this, because it sounds like, again, we're making assumptions and the theories and we're buying into this fear tactic that they've imposed on us, and we're playing the what if scenario and coming up with some huge figures. And yeah, I'm just disappointed. I'll see a couple other hands up. So Neil and then Adrian.
Hey Manaia, can you just clarify, like, for me, the additional rates requirements, the shortfall in hundreds of thousands? So is that cumulative there? Like, it's not. So you reckon in 25, 26 we'll need an extra 3 million more than we needed in 2024, 25? Is that the story? Are they cumulative or additional?
No, that's additional. So the figures I mentioned are what the total revenue would be in 10 years' time. Okay, what the total. So I'm not sure if I'm making this clear, but by 2031, and I'll come back to Ash's point if I can, but your point, Neil, by 2031, we would need 56 million more in revenue to be able to fund the debt levels that result from a doubling of our capital program. So the figures.
I guess really you need to send us those capital programs and bits and pieces so we can have a look at it, because.
Yeah. And so to Ash's point, yeah, sure. Just to Ash's point,
an awful lot of money to have to borrow. Like, I sort of like, that's like 200 million sort of thing.
You're right. That's it. So at the end, by 30th of June 2031, in our LTP, we're up to about 100 million, just over 100 million in debt. We would double that to just over 200 million. That's the figure. Quite right. So just to Ash's point, Mayor Ash, 100%. Look, I'm not wanting to scaremonger at all, because I agree. This kind of capacity to do that amount of work is just not realistic. It just won't happen. What I think we wanted to say was, and I'm assuming actually the reform won't happen. I'm assuming that what we're facing is a new regulatory regime, of which a critical point that the council has made, not only in the surveys but also last week, is there's so many unknowns. There's so many unknowns. We don't know what the regulator. What we know the regulator will do is they will change things. We don't know how much and how quickly. So it might only be, realistically, they might take a realistic view. Let's assume MPDC continues to manage water. They might say, realistically, can't go for that kind of level of compliance, so they'll introduce it in a different way. Whether it's a 10% increase in program or a 20% increase or a 30%, whatever that is, what the point we would make is that starts impacting on your ability to borrow for other things. So looking at the blue line there, that blue line on that chart shows our LTP as it at the moment and how close we get to our limit. We take out the three waters, we've got more headroom. We do more capital, whatever it is, 5, 10, 15, you will see that will increase across that blue line. We've just put a doubling because, not that we think that will happen, because that's what Wix have put in there. We don't believe that's feasible. So we're certainly, Mayor Ash, certainly this chart is not designed to suggest you should go any way. That chart is designed to say MPDC would be on its own and manage its water. We have some challenges there if that were to happen. But knowing this council, and you heard last week, Kevin Lavery, it was very, it was great for management to hear, and I'm sure for council to hear that, this council has been very, very prudent. It has funded 100% of its depreciation, and we would work out a way that we would ensure that we continue to be prudent. So this is not about going ahead with the government's proposal at all. This is just showing you a potential profile.
Adrian.
Yeah, it's sort of the worst case scenario in some respects, isn't it? And you think they're talking about doubling capacity. I guess the other thing too is still the unknown, and what's changed in the last 18 months is this national policy statement, the NPS for fresh water. It's where that lands for the regulations. So, especially with nitrogen, that's where that cost, when Karl talks about the 11 million becoming 30 million, It just depends how stringent those regulations are, and that's where it's all unknown. And it won't be just our council; it's every council probably will be faced with that. So funny, I find it quite frustrating to have to hear this.
Yeah, Don.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. No, look, this isn't. I'll just reiterate Manaya's points. This isn't about pushing you down any particular path, but I hope you appreciate the fact that as your advisors, we have to give you an appreciation of some of the implications or risks that we may face going down either path, because we've talked about the prospect of the entity and the concerns that are rightly and validly held around dealing with a separate entity to respond to our levels of service or our growth demands or the direction we might want to take. So there are risks in that as well. This is about illustrating that without knowing the possibilities that might arise from a regulator, particularly for such significant things, and Adrian just pointed out the NPS, if we go down the path of the retaining this responsibility, will be a different council to one who doesn't. It will be more entrenching, and there's nothing wrong with either of those two options, nothing at all, but will be different beasts. So if you had our neighbours opt in, they'll operate differently to us if we opt out. Now, there's nothing right or wrong. It's simply a case of understanding what potential implications arise from either option. And this is, as you say, doubling of our water, wastewater capital spend is potentially an extreme direction. But I'll guarantee you this, the estimates we've got in our LTP will be exceeded. They won't be undershot, they'll be overshot. We just simply don't know what the figure will be until we get through all the processes. But as I say, no right or wrong answer, a simple case of outlining to you as the elected members who ultimately must make a decision about some of the factors you might need to take into account. That's all.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if we focus on the worst case scenarios and we believe in the figures that have been presented to us from the DIA, then we may as well sign up now. And that's what's really frustrating for me, because this is exactly how they've planned it. Look, it only goes back to their bullshit propaganda ads on TV that they promoted, making it out to be this and out to that. Like, I'm just not in a comfortable position because we're playing that what if game, playing right into their hands. James Thomas.
Thanks, Miriam. I think come back to one of Manaya's first comments. New Zealand Inc. can't afford to do this, so if it was taken over by the new entity, then they're not going to meet those performance measures. So I'm concerned. I really am concerned that the fact is that we are compliant as we are, and yes, I know the landscape changes, and I know we talk about the NPS and all that kind of stuff, but what they're proposing is not logical and won't happen, and that's what really concerns me. They're saying let's compare what we have to do to get to this platinum style level, water level. Nobody will get there. Nobody will get there because the cost is prohibitive. And I do struggle when I look at New Zealand. Where is our issue with our water quality? Where is that issue? And that's what I keep coming back to. It just concerns the hell out of me that we are finding a problem where there is no problem. And so when we start doing our calculations based on trying to get to this utopia, we can't get there. The debt levels shows that we can't get there. But like I say, if we hand over, I can guarantee you that New Zealand Inc. won't get there either, because it's just going to be too expensive and too problematic. And with the exception of Havelock North, I'm really struggling to come up with an example. Okay, yep, they had the lead levels down south, etc., etc. But goodness me, these are isolated small things in terms of water quality. The stormwater seems to have more issues in the bigger centres. We seem to be doing well, and that's what I really struggle with.
Yeah, 100%. Don?
Well, I know. I'm just going to make the point that that's a valid conclusion for you to come to. And if that's the conclusion you come to, then in the sense that, no, this won't happen, that's your conclusion, then you make a decision based on that, to opt in or opt out. We're not trying to, but if we, I suppose just with respect, if we didn't give you these sorts of examples and they did arise, we've not done our job properly on your behalf.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Don. I appreciate that we need to see these examples, and I get that. But it's, yeah, I've just got to stop. Sorry.
Can I jump in there for a second as well, guys? I guess if these slides there are other slides. This is the voice of the council, right? You guys voted and responded in this way to these survey questions. So you have question 4 here. At least 2/3 of you are concerned about the ability to meet future challenge. So, regardless of whether you think this slide is valuable or not, or scaremongering or not, there are still 2/3 of this council believe that there are future challenges in place. And I guess that's the top level. The top level statement is there is a belief there is going to be challenges in the future.
Yeah. So Karl, then you could also say how much of a challenge. We know it's subjective, isn't it? Because the question's loaded. Because if you wanted us to put between 1 and 10 on there, I don't think that many people would have put 10 for the challenge. Because if they had, then they weren't listening to Kevin Lavery and them speak last week about our own council. So you ask the question the way it says, like, are you concerned? Well, of course you are, because there's challenges. We all know that. But the level of the challenge is different per council and within your own thoughts. So I see the challenges being on a low level, but I still see them as challenges.
That's fine. Then back to Don's point, then collectively as a council, you bank that away and say, yeah, there are challenges, but we think we are 3 out of 10 on the challenge scale. And therefore, when we make our decision, that's what's factored in.
Well, that's my thoughts, you see. So I said, so I don't take that as I don't know the level of what other people feel is the challenge level. But for me, I'm acknowledging we've got challenges, but I'm not saying that they're massive challenges.
So, and that's, sorry to interrupt,
that's all good.
Mr. Mayor. So yes, there are challenges, and it's really hard for us to define them too, Neil. It's really hard for us to give you good, accurate advice as to what the implication. I can only look to speculate on what a regulatory frame might look like. And if I apply it to building accreditation, I mean, it's onerous, it's expensive, and it's time consuming. And we've naturally, as in response to that, as the Waikato, and this hasn't happened all around the country, aggregated some elements of that service delivery. We've got a centralised group of people who work across all the local authorities as far as building accreditation is, and establish good practice, same practice. You go and get a consent anywhere in the Waikato region, you get the same response. But to get there is quite an onerous path. So the regulatory frame for water will have very much replicate that type of demand. But further than that, we know the regulatory path. For example, water metering will become absolutely necessary for every local authority in the country. because they'll say that it's a valid and reasonable way to manage demand for a natural resource which has more and more been required for certain both economic and recreational activity. So the thing is not about everyone accepts it will be challenging to some extent. Where it is on 1 to 5, 1 to 10, we don't know. That's a judgment in some extent. That's one element that you need to take into account that you will make a judgment on when you make your decision. All we're saying here is, hey, if our capital, let's say, how much capital have we got in our LTP for the next 10 years? When we look back on those 10 years, will each of those capital allocations be as we've outlined them? No. We know that. And there may well be other things that council wishes to bring in. So in looking at the capital profile, potentially water and wastewater will be the main component of that. And if it goes up by 10% or 20% or 30%, what effect does that have on the balance sheet and your aspirations to do other things? That's all.
I'll go to Bruce Dewhurst, Kevin Tappan, and then James Sainsbury. Can't hear you, Bruce. Your lips are moving, mate.
Bloody Zoom. Firstly, my comment on the survey, very difficult to actually press one button and really want to say another. What your results don't show are some of the comments that were probably put. I know I put comments in. If you ask me today where I marked on there, I can't even remember half the time. So sorry about that, Karl. Because you can argue both ways. But I know I put some comments on there to quantify where I'd place myself on the screen. I'm not satisfied that any new entity coming in is going to be able to do anything better than what we're doing now with what resources we have, what New Zealand Inc. resources have, and the whole thing's a crock of shit. Full stop.
Yep. Kevin Tappan.
I'm not sure I'd go as far as saying it's a crock of shit, Bruce, but I do agree with Neil and your points about the level of concern. I probably pushed concern. I'm pretty sure I did, but not because I think that there's nothing we can't. It's nothing we can't handle. We've handled it in the past. We've handled it in the future. It's not as if we put anything off, like kick the can out 10 years and just living on assets that will, may not make it. Most of the assets we've got a lifespan of them, and we're dealing with them. We can, if there's a new wastewater plant needs to be put in, could we afford to do that? I would say yes, we could, based on the fact that you paid off over 50 years and you've got 50 years of generations of our communities to pay it off. At the end of the day, it's not a huge concern. I don't think we've been negligent in our duties or anything, and I think in the past the councillors and hopefully in the future councillors will have to take the same stance, is that things need to get done. Look into the future. None of us have got a crystal ball. Nanaia Mahuta doesn't have a crystal ball, so some of the figures she's playing with they are scaremongering tactics. That's what they are. We have to look at those figures and take them as their opinion, but then I'm hoping that Karl in the next set of slides has got other things that we could do that would allow us to retain our own control over them. look at our side of the picture or a different set of figures. It's the concerning thing to me is that this has been raced through, and with what the country is dealing with right now, in with COVID, with the RMA, with the plan change 1, 2, and 3. It's just insane the amount of stuff that's going through at the same time, and it just can't be. It can't be more power than Putin, and it just can't happen. This is just ridiculous. It's honestly, I think this should be delayed, and I think that's what we should be. The signal we should be sending back to government: delay this. That's what needs to get done. We can't do this over Zoom in the middle of a COVID. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Just comment, a couple of things on that. Kevin, talking to Toby Adams, and they've written a letter to Cabinet suggesting that along the lines of what the South Island mayors have also said, that they need to put a halt to this. They're doing a local government reform at the moment as well, or review. They need to get that sorted first. They need to get the RMA sorted first, and then the Three Waters, because it all ties in. So quite interesting conversations. Look, I've got Manaya's hand up, Adrian, Don. James Sainsbury's been waiting patiently though. Shall we just go to James and then back to, say, Manaya for a reply, then Adrian, and then Don? How about that? James.
Interesting discussion, and sort of towards the end there, I think it came back to the point that I wanted to make, was that we haven't decided yet. That decision's not been made until December, and that sort of the window here is what are we going to be feeding back to the government before the 1st of October? And probably the two things that I took away from this so far is the timing, which Kevin summed up really nicely then, and then that second sort of broad point around whether the new entity has capacity above and beyond what we have to deliver what's expected. So I guess really just trying to keep in my mind about the ways that we can have contribute to the process at the moment. And then the other thing that I think Karl, sort of quite a nice framework that Karl put in place last week, at least intellectually, was around this idea that we can be very clear about our objections to the process and what that looks like, but also understand the implications of what would happen if it doesn't go our way, and how we can best interface with that. So just because we may decide collectively as a council that this isn't something that we don't think this is the best fit for us, we don't want to lose the opportunity to make the most of something that's not our first choice, but something we have to live with.
Yeah,
so those were the only points I wanted to make. Thanks, Ash.
No worries, thanks. Yeah, we've got to have that backup position for sure. I'll go to shoot to Manaya, and then Adrian, and then Don.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Ash. Well, really, Councillor Sainsbury, I was just kind of summarising in my own head the feedback that I'd heard, and Councillor Sainsbury has done that really well. I think the only other points I would add to that is that 2 points I think would be, seems to be the council view, is number one, the proposal as the government has it is unrealistic in terms of the capital profile. It's just not able to be done because of New Zealand Inc. And number two, that as a council, you feel that you have the ability that whatever the change that is imposed by regulation, you have the ability and the willingness to meet that challenge. Those are the words that I'm hearing from the feedback from the councillors.
Yep. Thanks, Adrian.
Yeah, and that's where I guess just trying to look at the bigger picture beyond the financial side is around looking at us as what's efficient, what's and loyalty, like with staff and that. We were talking last week, I think Donna mentioned about that local connection, and you sort of think, well, what if this goes ahead, and we all, as we said, it's challenged and whatnot, but if it was to, how many staff would be located in our district to manage our three waters? And how different might it be? You know, it's all these unknowns as to what it all means around these economies of scale, because I'm just quite challenged by that non-financial aspect of staff and having local people, because if we're going to end up with people travelling in, or there's all those other elements that I find the proposal hard to get my head around, and you know what that would mean. And the Scottish example is a classic where they've started redundancies. I think that comment was made last week. And they still haven't their performance, you know, even with their capacity, they must have increased their capacity or tried to double their capital spend, and they haven't achieved it. So this is where, this whole thing, timing, unrealistic goals, just keeps going.
It does. It's the gift that keeps giving, Adrian. Don, you've been waiting patiently, and then Sue.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Ash. So just to make the point again that Manaya's made too, that things are going to change because a regulator is going to be in the game. So it's not like things are going to continue as they are. They will change, and we will have to respond to that. But to Adrian's point, they're valid concerns about levels of service and responsiveness. And there's this concern, I think, being expressed in some circles about centralisation and all the rest of it. But I think we need to separate out the governance of this entity from the operational side of the entity. And, by way of example, if your power goes out and you ring the call centre, and I've had experience of this happening where the street fuse went out and the house went into lockdown, it was a requirement that they responded to my concern within 2 hours. And that's what the agencies and some of the discussion around how to influence those levels of service and so forth are going to be part of the economic regulator's role, but they'll require them. And so will the consumer panel's role. Now, I'm not saying that fixes everything, but what I'm saying is that these companies will be required very much to be very open about the level of service they have to provide. Now, I'd make the point, if they're required, and if you look at Watercare's monthly reporting around the responsiveness to water breaks and water stoppages and interruptions, they're very much held to that account. They're very transparent about their performance in those areas. And the thought that somebody could achieve a particular outcome for the top of the Coromandel by travelling from Hamilton operationally won't make sense if they are to achieve those outcomes. So part of the concern, and rightly held, around this, I would encourage you to reflect that in your feedback, to say, well, look, the standards that the economic regulator and the consumer regulator and they're talking about putting a water ombudsman in to be part of the oversight as well, is to very much say, give us reassurance that operationally we will have some influence in these areas.
Thanks, Don. Sue, and then Donna.
I guess my concern at the moment is we've got two crystal balls here, and they both say completely varying things, one at one end of the scale and one at the other. And I don't know how helpful it is that we try and justify either side. I mean, the one from DIA, as we know, is that it's going to go down dramatically, which is just ludicrous. And that one, of course, is going to go up, which we do not know. I guess my concern is that we find a solution and we find a way of presenting this back, that these numbers that they're presenting us are not right. And we need to find some way that they can actually present us with some figures that we can accept, if that's the way we're going to go. That's all. I'm just getting, you read one thing, you read the other, and they're completely different. That's concerning me.
Yep, it sums up the whole proposal from the start, Sue, unfortunately. Donna.
Yeah, I made a few notes here, and it's just when we do get to do our feedback, it would be good to be back in the boardroom. That's my first comment. Because this is quite scary, and this is a massive piece of work. I've been reading a few of the comments from the public. There is a lot of concern out there, but then the other side of the corner, I think people have forgotten that it's going to come off our rates, but they forget they're going to get a water bill or water rate instead. And my concern is that what they're going to get charged the next 5 or 10 years. These figures are a bit contradictory, and I do also worry about the level of service. Our assets and our water isn't bad compared to some other districts, and I just think that we're not going to have our how can I put it? The funds are going to be spent out in other districts. We're going to be missing out. I'm just really concerned, and I sort of agree with what James T said earlier on as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think about too is, yes, we all know it's going to go up, and the price of water is going to go up, and obviously in 10 years' time we're going to be paying more than we are today. That's like everything, and in 30 years' time we're going to be paying way more than we are today. That's reality. And if you think about it, when they talk about in their dashboard for us, and they say, well, in 30 years' time, if you opt out, you're paying $4,000 for your water a year. Well, guess what, guys? We pay about $3,600 a year now for your power bill, just one service for your power. That's now. And a lot of us pay more. Look what you pay for your power on your farm, that'd be staggering. Now, so is that too much in 30 years' time if you're paying $4,000 for your water? I don't know if it is, actually. A lot of people buying bottles of water as well as paying their water, So, yeah. Donna, I'll go back to you. Did you put your hand back up? Oh, all good. Okay. Can't see any more questions on my screen, so maybe back to you, Karl. Sorry, we might have just swiped the presentation a little bit there, but it's good to talk about it. Also, 100% agree with Donna that we need to be back in the boardroom as soon as we can to have better conversations, because it is limiting on the Zoom on such an important issue. Back to you, Karl.
No problems, guys. This is the point, right? This is why we're having a workshop, so we can discuss these things. So I guess I'll recap what at least I was taking away from those results above, the survey results above, was that we all, the majority of us think, the majority of you think that things are going to have to change in some way, that the delivery of the Three Water service is going to be more expensive and challenging in the future. The scale of the challenge may stretch NPDC, and that lifting to the Three Waters challenge may limit to some extent our ability to deliver other council business. I sort of moderated what my initial notes were based on the discussion we had here, and I promise I'll build in this discussion into some of the other points because I think it actually overlaps. So with that said, next slide. So question 8 here. So this is, I sort of grouped these questions as under the general banner of benefits of aggregation. So as you can see, the majority of councillors here I believe, actually all councillors here believe that there will be some benefit to some degree of aggregation on the delivery of waste and water services. The following question here, question 3, is if we maintain the Three Water service, again, this was the same question we saw before, possibly if you're sharing by aggregation some of those key core tasks, then that can allow council to potentially focus somewhere else in the future, while some of the other aspects are being picked up by your aggregation partners through some sort of mechanism. Again, a star next to that one there because I know the question wasn't quite in that ballpark. Scale of aggregation, again, there was discussion here about about aggregation, and the take-home message for me at least was that we also have some sort of aggregation level that we think might work, whether it be Waikato, Thames Valley, even these others here tended, you couldn't tie comments to votes, but through the comments, it tended to show that there was some sort of feeling that between the Waikato and Thames Valley as a group, that there was an aggregation opportunity there. But obviously, nobody in our council thought that the entity B boundaries were appropriate for us. Oops, overshot. So again, the sort of summary of those results was that aggregation will have some sort of benefit in the three water space, and aggregation may allow MPDC to continue or focus differently on continuing other business outside of the three waters load. But then the final sort of take home amongst the questions was about the scale of aggregation. So this comment here, or this slide here, building into that, was that we had sort of a general concern across all areas there about whether the scale of aggregation was really meeting the needs across a bunch of metrics. We weren't entirely sure whether the scale needed to be right to meet the affordability challenge as it's been presented to us. We didn't really know whether the scale was right to appropriately retain staff amongst all the other metrics in there. So I sort of lumped this one in that sort of category, is that there is a general feeling that though aggregation might deliver some benefits, as the government has presented to it, we still have a bunch of questions about exactly how their aggregation delivers any of these benefits to us. Oops, I've overshot one here as well. Sorry, scale of aggregation again. No, we've done that one. Sorry, guys. So I guess that brings us to, this is the discussion you guys had. I actually planned for that discussion. It was meant to happen here at this, this slide. And that was, have we got the survey results right? Have we interpreted what you guys have said correctly? I'm picking up, at least in that financial discussion there, that whilst you voted that way, and that's what you could draw from that, there's a bit of nuance hanging in and around there that really needs to be teased out and discussed amongst the council as we sort of move forward and form a view. Because remember, at the end of the day, at the end of the 6 to 8 week period, you're going to have to say something to central government to present your position or concerns to them. So I wanted to pause here. If there was anything else amongst those other elements, do we generally believe that some aggregation would be beneficial? Is the scale of aggregation a key feature that we want to discuss or have a view on? That's sort of an open space here to have a talk about that. So it's back over to you, Ash.
Yep, thanks, Karl. Any comments for Karl? Pop your hands up if you can. Looks like we're pretty well right there. Yeah, just noting the things that you've. Yep, Bruce Dewhurst. The lips are moving, mate, but we can't hear
you. I'm not against aggregation, all right, in some form, especially when it comes to, you know, the ability to get expertise and what have you in some of the critical planning and delivery areas and procurement and what have you. I just cannot see the benefit in blocking everything together in one big, gigantic teapot. There's and I would support, my selection was, you know, Waikato Regional, because we have some. You know, with the Waikato region now, with water and what have you. But the whole thing just frustrates me in the theory of it. I'm like to look at the practical side of things, and I can see so many difficulties to put this into practice.
Yeah, and I actually think a Thames Valley model on a catchment basis could even be better than a regional one, but that I'm guessing those sort of things can be our backstop too for conversations down the line. Adrian.
Yes, I guess the question for me, and Karl, whether you can attempt to answer it, I don't know, was, and I mentioned it last week about the economies of scale. And with this entity that they are proposing for us to be part of, Entity B, is it's a geographically very spread area, and with multiple water treatment, plants. How I'm really challenged by their to understand how you can get an economy of scale through such a broad area. Like if you've got a municipality of Auckland, you've got it by a condensed area. So, and that's where, when we start talking about a sub-regional or Thames Valley or Waikato or whatever, as to where the sweet spot is. And I think back of what Don said about the governance and separating the governance out from the operational side, and like how governance can have that overarching view. But I still find I'm not clear on how it all works. And I guess, again, it's because we're sitting down, we're not quite in the grassroots because we are governance within our district, but we're quite closely associated to the people that work and do the operational side. And that's where I guess it's another question, I suppose, to send back to them, is to get that assurance that what they're proposing is actually achievable on the ground, given our geographical spread, and how they're gonna manage that. So, Karl, have you got an opinion around, with the economies of scale and number of plants?
I think I raised it last time we had a workshop last week as well. I think guys so there's been some commentary out there that water isn't like, economies of scale wise, isn't like the electricity industry or some of the other industries that we have aggregated. So, you can't just throw away all our treatment plants because they're small and nasty and connect us up to one ginormous mega plant which serves the whole entire Entity B. You can't do that. So you lose out on some of those economy of scale type benefits there when you generally talk about infrastructure economy of scale. But with that said, I think there genuinely are some economies of scale that can be delivered just by having all the assets under one type of management or one structural management. And that will be through things, and hopefully I can highlight a little bit of that when we talk a bit about water care at the end of today. It'll be procurement approach, those sorts of things, the development of a centre of excellence, all those sorts of things I think do generate a benefit for us and an economy of scale for us. At least in the government's point of view, whether you believe it or not, the information they have provided us to have a look at has said between 500,000 and 1 million people, by their estimation, what they've looked at overseas generates economies of scale and therefore benefit.
Okay, go to Neil, and then Don, and then Kevin. Neil.
So, Karl, I'm just checking, did you see the article that was written by Gary Law yesterday, the former Chief Executive of Watercare?
No, sorry. I was too busy trying to put together this presentation.
Okay, so the former Chief Executive of Watercare came out yesterday with his article, which I thought was very good as an opinion piece, thinking that 13 entities is the correct number, being basically the amalgamation of the top of the South Island, and that stormwater shouldn't be in it whatsoever because there's no way to be charging for it. So if you get a hold of that article, I think it sums up a lot of my thoughts as well. And it's I found myself nodding along to some of his common sense comments. So if somebody could perhaps get that one sent out to all the councillors to have a read of probably at lunchtime today. It's a very small article, but it really sums it up quite nicely, especially somebody that's ex-Watercare Chief Executive. And so he's obviously been through the system, and talks about, that stormwater basically won't be able to be charged and should be left separately anyway out of the entities in total, which is something that I'd be quite comfortable with as well, because I think that's something that's not going to be very hard to manage. And I think QMU summed it up yesterday when it rained like that it's going to be an issue that it's going to be solved on a bigger level than Three Waters will be as well. So if you could get that sorted out for us, somebody, if Tamara could get that and send out as an email, it'd be quite good. Thanks,
I'm just
Tamara.
putting through the link now.
Cheers.
Thanks. Don?
Yeah, thanks. I was just following on from Neil, actually. I think if I had been given advice or ever been asked to give advice to the government, I would have said go with the current regional council areas, because it may not have achieved the ideal financial outcome, but it had, in my view, quite a number of other benefits, not least and perhaps overlooked, to be blunt, a cultural sense of ownership and relationship. Now we can ignore those soft sides in pursuit of the technical and financial stuff, but I would have argued with the government, well, you do so at your peril. I would also agree that I was surprised they left stormwater in, because it's so tied to land use in a much more dispersed way. Put it that way. There's problems all over the place, little bits of problems, which at our level we can deal with more in a more reactive way. If you're going to be dealing with it at a higher level way, some of those issues will just languish or get overlooked. So I think it's a valid area for you to feed back on, putting all the other issues aside. If you feel that there is some benefit to aggregation, in part or in whole, it's reasonable for you to say, hey, it should have been or could have been perhaps more achievable if you landed on a regional area. I think they've gone for the doctor, a theoretical nirvana, and I think they pushed the envelope too far. That's my personal opinion on that particular aspect.
Yeah. Kevin Tippin.
I agree with Neil and Don. Stormwater, that shouldn't be in there. That was just ridiculous. I'd be most in favour of a Thames Valley one, TCDC, Hauraki, and South Waikato. If I didn't get that one, I'd be happier with Waikato than I am with the forthcoming. Yep, 100%. I guess my problem is the government has put out figures that are based on theoretical stuff. We've been doing Three Waters all this time. We know 100% what our figures are and what we've done, what we've achieved. So our perception of how our network is performing is based on historical fact. Theirs is theoretical, and that's where I think I struggle to look at these figures and conclusions because. I mean, look at Watercare. Is that a perfect scenario? We already use shared services models here for other things, and they work great. And I'm more than happy to go down the line of shared services and what have you on a smaller basis. But I just don't like the 4-1. And I think if we're going to push back, that's where we need to push back. We need to push back on smaller aggregation.
Sue.
Yeah, I'm just trying to refine our thinking. I mean, when are we going to get to the big discussion of what that region should be? Because I think that's going to be the most important thing for us in our pitch for which way we go, is how we can get the best possible outcome for ourselves. And I mean, Kevin, I take your theoretical situation, but I mean, we've just presented some theoretical numbers as well. So that's what's sort of getting to me. Who is right and who is wrong in this conversation? So is it them or is it us, or where are we going to land? So that's my concern. But I'm really the regions are a big part of what we need to present, I think, and I think we need to come to some sort of agreement on what that region's going to be. I'm a Waikato Regional Council region, but that's just me.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's about, like you say, is we get to a point where we have a viewpoint on what's being proposed, and then we have, well, we're not happy about it, but we would like, if it's going to be made mandatory, then this is something that we'd prefer, you know.
I think we just need to push that, because saying yes or no outright isn't going to achieve what we need to achieve.
Yeah,
we need to come up with which way we want to go for the future.
Yeah, we need.
Otherwise, we're just going to be pushed into something, and that concerns me.
Yeah, you can bet that's exactly what they want us to do.
Yeah.
What?
Come up with a different scenario.
Yeah, absolutely.
As Don said, they've gone for the 100% big scenario. We hate it. So if we agree to go to Waikato or Thames Valley or whatever, that's probably where they want us to be anyway.
Yeah, and that's where I think we should be discussing and targeting our thoughts on.
Yeah, the thing I like about the Thames Valley model would be, my first initial preference would obviously, because it is a smaller basis, but I think we could get some benefits from obviously shared even staffing levels along those lines. The other thing is it's the four councils that we're talking about, South Waikato, ourselves, Hauraki and Thames Coromandel, none of us have super high debt to revenue on our three waters, and all our three waters infrastructure is in relatively good condition. And that's where I'd like, ideally, I think that would be a goal. It may not fit with their mindset, and then from that, then I would then think a regional basis would be better. Yeah, would be my second best option, but that's just me. And I'll just give a quick update too, because some things did come out of the Mayoral Forum Zoom meeting on which could be interesting. Is there is the government are seeing that there's getting the feeling that there is a big pushback on this. There's more and more communities have come out and saying, no, we're not that keen on it. Hearing that there's about 33 mayors now that aren't keen on it, or indicating that way, or their councils aren't. The National Council are also, I talked to Jim Milchrist, the Mayor of Waipa, after the meeting, and he also confirmed that National Council now are starting to change their thinking because the level of support's not there. And interestingly, Stuart Crosby from the LGNZ is starting to do a bit of a U-turn on it as well. The government is seeing that there's no public support out there for this reform. So that just came about on Monday and Tuesday this week. Yes, so that's quite interesting too. And there's also talking to another mayor, and he's saying that it's looking like the government may have to do a bit of a change of thinking when the results come back in December. I'll go to James Sainsbury, and I think Adrian, you put your hand up. Yep, James.
Yeah, so I guess I really like the way you think so, and the way that you're helping us focus a little bit, and probably following on from that, I'm confused as to where we're going. Like, so is option one no amalgamation of any description whatsoever, or is our starting point actually that we are amenable to some degree of amalgamation, and that it's just about choosing the best option? Because the statements from quite a few fellow members are that I'd just be interested. I mean, everybody's throwing up scenarios which they prefer more than what's been proposed, but is that the option that people want if we have to change? I'm just not sure how we're progressing in that space.
Yeah, for me, no throws us out of the negotiation table. That's all.
Yeah, so I know for you, Sue, but I'm just wondering, like, more broadly, like, is everybody a no, but if we have to go, this is what we want to do?
I guess I'll jump in there, James, and sort of attempt to answer your question. Is at the moment, I'm still questioning the validity of a large entity that they've proposed. And we've obviously come up with, we're wanting assurance or want to ask questions around, levels of service, and around the conversation around the doubling, the whole thing. I guess, and then when we start talking about a Thames Valley region, well, my question is, what does that mean for South Waikato? Because we're throwing them into our catchment, but they're actually split, because Putaruru is in our catchment, but Tokoroa is in the Waikato catchment. So that's where, Thames Valley isn't necessarily from a catchment approach, doesn't really fit for South Waikato. So, for you, James, I think at the moment it's what we want to put to the government is around those the ideas, because I think we all have a healthy scepticism of central government's stuff coming from the top down, and we're more from the bottom up at this stage. And we're striving to obviously get the best for our community and know that we are going to try and make the best decision for our community going forward.
Of course, that's the default, right? So I'm still confused though, like even more so given the disagreement with the survey results that we all contributed to and Karl presented today, like is the best for our community that we view not going into any sort of amalgamation of any description? Or is it, yes, we do need to go into some sort of system and that will actually deliver the best outcomes for our community, and then some sort of SWOT type analysis of the different permutations that are out there with a clear indication that actually the thing that's put forward by central government is a no. So based on the discussion, based on the survey results, I would have thought that it was the latter, but then there was a lot of pushback when Karl presented those that actually no, people are really not comfortable with the idea of amalgamation of any description. So yeah, more just I am struggling to see how this is leading towards a constructive feedback as part of this process.
Are we noting that this is one of our major concerns? Because this has sort of got to come back to the table at some stage, because this is really important. This is the kicker, really.
Yeah, sorry, can I just leap in there, Mr. Mayor? I don't mean to be rude, but it's hard on Zoom not to be sometimes. I think we will pull this together at the end. That was the intention, and try and establish at least the kernel of the positions or issues you want to express in any feedback to the, and obviously we will look to a face-to-face discussion to, if you like, cement those and tie those in.
I would like Karl's opinion on the region at some stage. We'll just put a message up, but he'll get back to us at some stage, no doubt.
Well, I think to be fair, Sue, that it's hard, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I'm just thinking it's hard to make a call at a technical level as to what's appropriate and not appropriate.
I just would like an opinion of the man who's in charge, whether, it just might give us sort of a basis for something.
Russell, and then Kevin.
Looking at some of these councils that are writing to the government already, asking for it to be delayed, is that something that we can agree on in action now before the end of the month? It's a non-binding letter just saying delay it. Can we get that away? We're not asking for anything, we're not suggesting anything, just say delay it.
Raise your hands if you think that that's a good idea. How many have we got? Yep. Looks like we've got a consensus there. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because it may start the thought process in their camp too. Good idea. Kevin Tappan and then James. Did you raise your hand, James, or you still want to speak? Yeah. Okay. I'll go to Kevin and then back to you, James.
I was just going to suggest the same thing as Russell, that we need to put a stake in the sand somewhere. I think writing the letter back is a great idea. Just on the fact of amalgamation, I think we've shown in the past that we're not adverse to amalgamating to get benefit over a service. In fact, we already do that for our waste and what have you. It shows we're absolutely open to that idea, and I think it would be crazy to not investigate it if this doesn't happen. It would be crazy to not investigate it to make things better for our community. I mean, if we can get economies of scale by going with TCDC and Hauraki and South Waikato, then that would be what we should do if we're really making decisions based on benefit to the community. So I'm not adverse to amalgamation. I'm just adverse to the scale of it, perhaps. But yeah, I think the letter is a great start, and we need to buy ourselves some time.
Yep. And James Sainsbury.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that more time, don't rush this through, da-di-da is obviously going to be the first point of any communication. But are you suggesting, Russell, that that's the limit of what we feedback as part of this process, because it's just going to carry on potentially regardless of what we say? So I'm uncomfortable if that's the limit of what we're sending back by the 1st of October deadline.
Definitely not, James. I think it's just the start. If a few other councils or mayors around the country do that, it just sort of gives a direction to the government straight away. Still working on, we've got 4 weeks to decide on what we want to do or which way we want to head, to come back with further recommendations. And it's at least it's putting MPDC, letting them know that, hey, give us more time.
I can't hear a word you're saying, Russell.
Can't you? No. Definitely not, James. Sorry. Yeah, but it'll give MPDC, put us in there with the other mayors and councils around the country, and just let the government know what we're about, and that we want more time to discuss it, and hopefully we'll be around the boardroom so we can have proper discussions and that. Yeah. But there's a lot more to discuss. It's really great what I'm hearing today, and it's I certainly couldn't make a decision today.
No, that's for sure, and nor do we need to either. Any other questions? No. Okay, so Karl, back to you. Is it?
Yep. So I guess I'll just do a bit of a wrap up around this part of the summary results so far. There are still some more to come about some other issues here, but we've had some really good discussion in it. So my notes don't quite match that, so I'm going to try to do my best. But overall, we sort of talked about there's a belief that there is a need for change, like I said, that there's going to be some sort of expense and challenge in the future. Though I think what I'm hearing from the earlier conversation was that the scale of that challenge may be more manageable than what has been presented to us through the governmental modelling. And that sort of feeds into the latter elements of aggregation and scale of aggregation. And again, I'm not trying to lead you guys. I'm trying to put together, at least for me, what I'm hearing from you is that we think also that some scale of aggregation could be beneficial in Three Waters, and possibly linking those two things together, that our perception of how manageable future challenges are may drive or guide what we think is a natural and more palatable boundary should an aggregation occur.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Cool. Only sort of putting those things together purely for the point of trying to crystallize sentences for you guys to sort of mull over, not take forward, but mull over. Very good.
Okay.
So some other aspects here. So here are the other aspects of the surveys, the other questions. So this one here, clearly said to me that the majority of councillors think that beyond all the other slides that we've already talked about, that government's done a relatively poor job at presenting and supporting their proposal.
Yeah.
Because there's a high level of dissatisfaction or a disagreement that we understand it. That overall, we're dissatisfied with pretty much every aspect across our council. So over 50% are dissatisfied with pretty much every aspect of the government's proposal. Can't roll on next. Here we go. This one here was an interesting one. There are definitely three key areas that we think the government needs to do better in explaining this reform to us. So what I pick up from this is that the government needs to do better in describing whether the size of the aggregation it's proposing is reasonable given the risk and scale of the change, that the public ownership of assets, how is that going to be protected, and is council's residual liability proportionate to the level of direct control over those assets that we have, and how these various agencies actually impact and direct this entity. So that's sort of what I took away there from these here. So that would sort of form, at least for me, where there could be some thinking on, and you guys have sort of touched on that with your other discussion there about what we're going to feed back, what you could feed back, not we, what you could feed back to government. Majority of you disagree that you understand the government's proposal. There is general dissatisfaction with all aspects of the government's proposal. And there are three key areas around financial modelling, ownership of assets, and the roles of the various agencies which stand out amongst the other aspects of the government's proposal which need further information. So that's where would I guess, ostensibly target our questioning.